TokeTok with Mountain Man and the Wizard.
Hey guys, tonight's story on TokeTok is written by Britton RT from Reddit. Go check him out. And the title of tonight's story is How I Became a God. Hope y'all enjoy. I wasn't the smartest when I was born. In fact, I was a cripple and a simpleton. I couldn't walk, so I dragged myself across the forest floor, never straying from my mother's presence. I felt at the time she never cared much for my siblings and I, mostly letting us fend for ourselves. But I realized now she kept a close eye on us. She was cold, distant, dumb like me, but she knew how to watch for large animals and other potential threats as my brothers, sisters, and I slowly figure out how to feed ourselves. It seems cruel in retrospect, and many of my siblings died young. Life was hard crawling in the dirt of the forest floor, treating anything remotely edible as a banquet to be cherished. As I slowly grew, she eventually disappeared, leaving me and two of my remaining brothers alone at a very young age. They both perished shortly after. But somehow I managed to survive against all odds, crawling in the mud, struggling against my disability, finding food and shelter anywhere I could. I slowly learned how to use my disabilities to my advantage, setting ambushes and traps for small game. But I was still fundamentally an idiot, and no matter how clever I thought I was back then, failure was common and life continued to be. Surviving in the jungle while mentally disabled and handicapped was mostly a factor of sheer luck. Though at times I thought myself to be quite adept. I never stayed in one place for long, and I moved very slowly but carefully. My diet consists of anything I could find laying, which was edible, mostly small animals I could catch, but I could go hungry for very long periods of time. Eventually, I stumbled on a small stream with an even smaller cave nearby. I made it my home for a while. It wasn't much, but it was hidden well and provided some sense of security. I would drag myself out to the stream and bask in the warm tropical sun at times, take naps under trees, and eat as often as I could manage. Those were my simple pleasures in my life back then. Predators were always a threat, and being crippled, running was not an option. So I learned to hide. I learned to read my environment. I learned when to be loud and when to be quiet. And against all odds, I somehow survived. Once again, in retrospect, I mistook luck for cleverness. And that would have been my entire life up until I starved or finally ran out of luck. But that is where my story really begins, where it should have ended. I was crawling along the forest floor searching for something, anything to eat. It had been many, many days, and I had a furious hunger. All I know how to do was hobble around, crawling and dragging myself through the jungle, looking for scraps or small animals I could ambush on the ground. I had just pulled myself through a small bush when I saw it. The jaguar was low to the ground, in a pouncing position. On any other day, I might have became its meal, and then and there. But it was focused on something else. I remained absolutely still, barely even breathing, hoping not to draw its attention. It crouched down even further, clearly preparing to strike. Its eyes focused like only a hunter's can be. I dared a quick glance, and its target, and what I saw was the most unusual bird. Giant and dangerous in its own right, bright and colorful, and nearly the size of the jaguar itself. It was a rainbow of feathers with a crown of plumage on its head. Of course, at the time, I didn't realize how unusual this creature was. All I knew was that the jaguar was going to try and take it down at any moment. And it did. Try to, at least. The bird took flight the moment the jaguar leapt, and it soared into the canopy, the cat pursuing. I remained still for some time to see if it would return, but eventually eased out into the small clearing. There wasn't much of interest, so I wiggled up the small hill the bird had been resting on, only to find when I reached the top that it was in fact a giant bird's nest. And to my delight, resting inside were 3 very large eggs of unusual color. Of course, I ate them all right then and there, and then dragged myself back to my usual resting spot. Sleeping with a full belly was its own reward. But that was when things started to change. Over the next few days, I started to notice things I hadn't been aware of before. Small things at first, observations about my surroundings that I hadn't noticed before. The world looked a little bit more colorful than it did, shapes a little more defined. I was able to pay attention to more things at once. As days turned to weeks, I started realizing I could make plans that were more complicated than just waiting silently for something to run by so I could grab it, or looking for scraps laying around. I started to devise clever traps using rocks and other features of my environment to help me catch my food. Choosing my resting locations in places where bushes and leaves would ensure I would hear predators on the ground. I was still a cripple, but I was growing smarter. I also began to grow bigger, a lot bigger, and I had been an underfed runt most of my life, but in the span of several months, I had become a virtual giant. Well nourished now and nearly 6 feet, all muscle, I still had to crawl around, but I could do so with a speed and vigor I had never known. I felt optimistic and elevated, yet I had no idea what was still to come. Hey guys, it's the Wizard. Thank you for tuning in for How I Became a God Part 1 by Britain RT on Reddit. Yeah guys, well stay tuned. A couple more days, I'll have Part 2 out. Alright guys, remember, keep your tinfoil hats and your bowls close. You never know what may happen. Peace.